And of course, you've heard me talk about the word love. The word love can mean 40,000 different things. You know, you love baked potatoes, or you love cars, or you love golf, and then somewhere down the line you love your wife. But anyway, it's in there, and but love can just mean so many different things according to the context and according to how you're meaning to use it at the time. And rest is the same way. There is God's Sabbath rest. Notice, if you would, here in chapter 4, and notice verse number 4. For he spake in a certain place of the seventh day on this wise, and God did rest the seventh day from all His works. Now, question. Was God finished working after the 6 days? No. Watch it. He was completed with His creation. But He continued and continues to work. So God intends for us to know His rest, but yet to continue to labor and at the same time be at rest. The second thing is the rest that Israel had when they went into Canaan. Notice back in chapter 3 and notice in verse 11. So I swear in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest. Remember now in the context there, he's talking about when Moses brought the children of Israel to Kadesh Barnea, sent in the spies. The 12 spies came back. 10 of them said, we can't do it. The other 2, Joshua and Caleb, they said, yes, we can. Joshua and Caleb and their families entered into their rest that God had for them. Remember this. Notice the parallel and notice what he's saying here. Rest is not the absence of activity. Rest is not the absence of doing. Rest is being confident, satisfied, and settled in the will of God for your life. You have a rest when you know what you're doing. Simple illustration. I don't ever get up and say, Lord, would you lead me to do today in the ministry what you want me to do for the rest of my life? Why? I settled that 54 years ago. I'm going to be a preacher for the rest of my life. Now, wherever I preach, that's up to God. But I rest in the fact that I know that I'm doing what God has called me to do. So there's the rest that they had in Canaan. Then there's the what we will call the believer's rest that we have in salvation. Notice chapter 4 and verse 3. For we which have believed do enter into rest, as he said, as I have sworn in my wrath, if they shall enter into my rest, although the works were finished from the foundation of the world. Now, don't let me scare you on this. God had planned, organized, and orchestrated that the Israelites would possess the land of promise, the land of Canaan. They went in there, watch it, but not at the first time when God wanted them to go in. They rebelled. So when they rebelled, there was a punishment for rebelling. What was that punishment? It was to wander around for 40 years. Can you imagine? Let me see if I can get it to where you can see it here real easy. Can you imagine God saying to you, or to me, but God saying to you, I want you to be in church every Wednesday night unless you're sick or out of town or otherwise totally hindered. And you don't do it, and God says, okay, now I'm going to break both your legs, and you're not going to be able to walk, and I may take your arms, and you'll be paralyzed for 40 years. That's sort of what the Israelites felt like. And here's the amazing thing. They got mad at Moses. Why? Because he listened to them. If Moses hadn't listened to the 10 and said, no, we're going in because that was the will of God for them to do. But they had to pay a price. Always remember this. Disobedience to God's direction and leadership in your life always brings consequences. Always. Remember this now. Following God, obeying God, has consequences. They're good. They're good. The consequence of not obeying God, can I use Texan on this? It ain't good. And the amazing thing is, God knows where to not be good to you the hardest. I don't know if you had a mother like mine. I hope sometimes you do, and sometimes I'm glad you didn't. My mother, and by the way, I had to sit by my mother in church quite often. Every time I got in trouble, I had to sit by her. So a lot of times I was sitting by her. My mother did not believe that children ought to wiggle and jump around in church. You ought to pay attention. Now, I don't hurt your feelings, but my mother never took me a coloring book to church. My mother, if she had had an iPad, my mother would have never let me play on an iPad while the preaching was going on. Why? You're supposed to listen to the preacher. Well, they won't get anything out of it. Well, do they not get anything out of it when you talk to them? Do they not get anything out of it when a school teacher talks to them? We have several teachers here tonight. They'll say, I don't think mine do very much. But children can learn more than you think they can. Well, how did your mother keep you still? These two fingers on the back of my arm, squeezing it. Not stand that today. I'll hurt somebody over it. Then if it was number 2 times, as she did squeezing, then she'd squeeze and turn it. Now that's smarts. And if I'd said, ow, I'd been going to the cry room. I thought, as a boy, that maybe that cry room was if a child began to, little baby began to be, disobedient or fussy or whatever, which children are going to do. Parents could take them in there. They wouldn't disturb anybody, and the baby could cry or whatever, and they could change the baby, feed the baby, whatever they need to. I found out for the Collier boy, that's where she took me to make me cry. There are consequences for wrong action. My mother, I'm thinking hard now, my mother never pinched me when I did right. Are y'all getting the picture? You know what? That was a blessing. I don't know if I told y'all. I may have told y'all this. I remember I was preaching revival. I think I was in Covington, Indiana preaching. And right in the middle of the service, this little boy began to misbehave. I was watching him and seeing it, but Dad did the right thing. picked him up in his arms. He started out, and about halfway back, the little boy said, "Help! Somebody help me!" I lost it. I said, "Son, I'm sorry. There is no help for you. Dad's going to kill you. That's all there is to it." There are consequences. Now, you and I, who know the Lord is our Savior, we rest in His salvation. Try to keep your thinking straight about the matter of salvation. You are saved, but it's not your salvation. It's His. Remember what David said in the Psalms, Psalm 51? He said, Lord, return unto me the joy of Thy salvation. See, because it's His, He can gift it to us. He can grant it to us. And by the way, we can't give it back. Why? Because that salvation, listen to me very carefully, comes to live in you. He is the way, the truth, and the life. If He's the way, then He has to be here to direct you and to keep you. I love talking about the fact that you can't lose salvation. Where would you lose it to? You realize this? I have a pocket knife. I was telling Brother Ronnie Dyer before church, unless I'm on an airplane, and you see me with pants on, I hope you don't see me the other way, but you see me with pants on, I'm going to have a pocket knife. I have several pocket knives. Now, this is sort of my church knife. It's sort of a dressy little knife. Now, when I go out with some of my deacons, I have a bigger knife. Well, I don't know what we're going to do out on that thing. But anyway, I have a knife. And I lost one of my good knives one time at the airport. I got to the airport. I had already checked my bag. I got to the airport. I put my carry-on up on the little tray there, and it went through. The guy said, "Sir, I'm going to need to check your bag." I said, "Hey, go right ahead." He checked it, and he pulled out my pocket knife. At the hotel, when I was packing, I flipped it over, and I missed my big suitcase that I checked, and it fell in my carry-on. And I said, "You're going to take that away, aren't you?" He said, "Oh, no, sir, I'm not going to take it away. You're going to give it." Or he said, "You don't have to fly." One of the two, it doesn't matter. I started laughing. He did too. But he said, "Now look, I can let you have it. Go back out of security. Go get your bag. Put it in." I said, "That bag is probably on the airplane now." So there, what I'm saying is this. I knew where my knife was. I know where she is too. But I know where my knife went to. If you lose your salvation, where does it go? It came from God, and He has to receive it back, and He doesn't want it. Why? He gave it to you and to me. Rest in the fact that you're saved and that you're safe. God's going to take good care of you. The life of this rest, that's the overcomer's present victory. Look over, if you would, to verse 11 of chapter 4 again. He said, "Let us labor, therefore, to enter into that rest, lest any man should fall after the same example of unbelief." Isn't that strange? We labor to enter into rest. That sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? We're going to work to go into rest. We're going to rest while we're working. We're going to labor while we're resting. That's exactly what God was telling the children of Israel when He told them back in Numbers 14. He said, you're to enter in there. Now, watch it. They had to take every acre of the land. But what were they doing? They were resting in what God had told them that He was going to do. They rested in that. Now, they were resting in it, and I think these that were entering in under Joshua, they knew those folks who died in the wilderness had no rest. There is never rest in the wilderness. There's discomfort, there's heartache, there's disappointment, there's confusion, there's anger in the wilderness. Where's the rest? It was in Canaan. Where is our rest in this life? Again, let me just remind you, Canaan in Scripture is not a picture of heaven. You can stand on Jordan's stormy banks all you want to. When you cross your Jordan, you're not going to heaven, you're going into victory. Canaan is a picture of the believer in his life winning the victories over sin and self in his life on a daily basis. That's walking in Canaan. And by the way, I think in our Baptist churches there are too many people still standing on Jordan's stormy banks and looking. Go ahead and get across. Start living that life of victory. How do you do that? You've got to die to yourself. You ever heard that before? You have to die to yourself. That's what crossing Jordan was. I mentioned a few weeks ago as we were studying. You remember when the priest got in the middle there and Jordan River had divided and they stood there with the Ark of the Covenant. They took 12 stones from the east side of Jordan. They brought them to the middle and they stacked them up there. They took 12 stones out of the bed of the Jordan. They took them to the other side, to the west side of Jordan, inside Canaan, inside the Promised Land. And they built an altar there. When those priests went out of Jordan and the water came gushing down, it just washed those old stones away. My sins are in the depths of the deepest sea. I can now worship God in my Canaan. That's what the altar was for. It was for worshiping God. What did they put on that altar? A dead sacrifice. What did Paul say in Galatians 2:20? I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave Himself for me. Did you notice this life in the flesh? We're still in our flesh, but we're to be crucified with Christ. How do you do that? You do it by faith. Whatsoever is not of faith is sin. So we surrender by faith. We yield our lives by faith. And by the way, we have to do that on a daily basis. Why? We're still in the flesh. Still in the flesh. You let somebody cut you off in traffic, you better die to yourself. How do you do that? By faith and keeping your mouth shut. Yeah. Isn't that amazing? Little things like cutting off. You mean I can lose my victory by somebody cutting me off in traffic? Yeah, if you allow it to let your flesh control you and not the Spirit of God to control you. Watch this, I promise you. Some of us tonight, somebody's going to cut us off in traffic. We're going to try to figure out, how do we handle it? You die to yourself. Die to yourself. physical problems, bad word from the doctor, cancer, heart, leukemia, wayward child, marriage is about to dissolve, you die to yourself. When a child of God, listen to me carefully, when a child of God enters into that rest that God has for them, watch it, your Jerichos will fall. The Canaanites will be defeated. The Jebusites will take off running. And what God is doing in your life will go out before you. Because folks are going to want to know what changed you. You used to be some old gripey gut. Why are you so nice now, cordial and friendly? Oh, it's not me. I'm still that. I'm still an old gripey gut. But that gripey gut dies every time he tries to live. You do that by faith. Canaan rest is the rest that we have in present victory. And then there's that future rest. Notice in verse 9, he said, there remaineth therefore rest to the people of God. There remains something else for us. Did you ever think about one of these days, you and I are not going to have to put up with our flesh. Isn't that good? One of these days, there won't be anybody in a heavenly chariot cutting you off in traffic. One of these days, there'll be no sickness. There'll be no sorrow. There'll be no death. One of these days, there'll be heaven. Be a new heaven and a new earth, the new Jerusalem, being with God. That's that rest we look for. But He gives us these other rest while we're here. Isn't that a gracious God to do that for us? I mean, for Him to just say, well, I'm going to save you, but now you just get along by yourself. Thank God He doesn't leave us to ourselves. Thank God He blesses us. Well, that's my introduction to chapter 4. We're going to take up 4 exhortations that Paul gives us in chapter 4. The first one we're going to study is this, verses 1 to 8. Let us therefore fear. Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute, preacher. We've just been talking about rest. And now you're going to talk to me about fear? Absolutely. Fear. Going to talk about that next time. Well, we have a blessing tonight. Farron, come on down here, would you? Brother Joey, you ready?